Liverpool against Manchester United might be the biggest game in English football from a global perspective, but it's not the most difficult to broadcast. It's a matter of fact that in any given game, I will make at least one mistake, probably 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10. But so will Lionel Messi.
Firstly, I really want to thank you for carving time out. Really appreciate you speaking with me today. If you could give me a minute to perhaps tell our viewers and tell you as well as to what prompted me to reach out to you. So this was about 3 weeks back or 4 weeks back, I should say. This was a Saturday night when I'm typically engrossed watching football. Of course, there was a massive void in my life, in all of our lives, I should say, all of our football fans' lives. And instead of actually being able to watch live football, I was watching lots of these YouTube videos of, clips of old matches and just wallowing in nostalgia. And that's when I heard your beautiful voice, and I was like, you know what? I miss that voice a lot. Of course, I miss football more than I miss Peter Drury's voice, but oftentimes, football and Peter Drury go hand in hand. So that's when I thought maybe, let me look up Peter Drury's social media handles. So I tried looking up on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Didn't quite find you anywhere, but found you on LinkedIn. When I first came across your profile on LinkedIn, I was slightly circumspect, thinking that, you know what, this might be some fake account or some account that's actually handled by a fan. And so I messaged you to test if my suspicion was true or not. And lo and behold, you replied to me, and I was absolutely thrilled that you actually agreed to speak with me. So I'm chuffed to bits that I'm speaking with you. And if 3 weeks back you had told me that I'll be having a conversation with you today, I would have called you bonkers. So Peter, thank you again for speaking with me.
You'd have been right. I am bonkers. You're welcome, Anubhav. It's good to speak.
Is this the first interview that you've done ever since it was announced that the Premier League will resume on the 17th of June, or have you had interviews since then?
Since the date of the resumption, no, this is the first one, actually, since we've known a date for sure.
And what was your first reaction, your initial reaction when you first heard of the news?
Hurrah! That was my first reaction. we can begin again. I'm really excited. Listen, Anubhav, I live happily with my family. I've enjoyed 2 or 3 gentle months of not racing up and down the motorways of England following football matches. But as you say, it's been a big void in our lives. And I think the great Gary Lineker tweeted the other day, or said the other day publicly in this country, we shouldn't be ashamed of saying we've missed it. We understand that there have been bigger things, of course, much, much bigger things. Football hasn't mattered at all, but there's no shame in saying we've missed our football. And the fact that there is now a date that, the sun is peeping above the horizon again is a really exciting prospect.
Absolutely. And, despite the fact that we're all cognizant of safety being of paramount importance, I think we can all admit the fact that there has been a void in our lives and we have missed football, as you rightly pointed out, Gary Lineker pointing out.
Yes, well, we have, because we realise that it is not in itself important, but football, sport in general, the arts, music, these are all things that decorate our lives, Without them, life would be plain. Life would be in black and white. These are the things that make life colourful. And football is something that enlivens our passion, brings us thrill and jeopardy and excitement. And, you can go a little while without them. It's not a bad thing to take a rest from them. But my goodness me, you're ready for them when they come back.
Absolutely. And how have you been spending your time? I'm guessing you've been spending a fair bit of time with your family. You've been volunteering as well during the week.
Yes, I have. I've spent a lot of time with my family. That has been the big bonus, really, because I do spend a lot of time away from home. It's been lovely to be at home. We've been fortunate in England through this period that, on the whole, the weather has been very good, which isn't, as you know, always the case in England. So those of us with a little bit of grass behind our house have been able to enjoy that. I've been exercising well. 2 of my 3 adult sons have been back in the household, which has been great. I thought our nest was empty forever, but they've come back and we've all got on very well. I've been reading books and so on. Yes, I've done a couple of days a week of volunteering, which has also been lovely at a nearby hospital setup. And other than that, I've just been sort of drumming my fingers on the table, waiting for it to come back.
Fantastic. And you missed one point, agreeing to Anubhav's request to actually speak with you as well.
Yes, absolutely. Of course. Of course. Actually, one of the lovely things, and I don't want to make you think that yours isn't a really lovely call to have, but one of the lovely things has been that I've had quite a lot of these calls from various countries all the way around Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, America, Canada, New Zealand, all of those places outside of the UK, the sort of English-speaking world, where I'm fortunate enough to broadcast the Premier League. There's been a lot of interest from all of those places, and I've been connecting with countries that, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have had the chance to make that sort of intimate connection with. So that's been really good.
Absolutely. And I can tell because I came across a lot of your YouTube videos, and these were videos of people having interviewed you. And a lot of them were actually posted over the last 2 or 3 months. So I could tell that they were interviews that were done very recently during the lockdown period.
Yes. And that's been good. I mean, that has been a good thing. What it's done to me is illustrate the appeal of the Premier League worldwide. You know, I'm not so vain as to believe that that the appeal is me, because I don't think it is. I happen to be the guy who shouts down the microphone about the Premier League, and therefore I'm a sort of conduit to the conversation that people want to have about and with the Premier League. So that's been a really good, worthwhile thing to be able to do.
You've mentioned this multiple times in the past in your written interviews, as well as some of the video interviews that you've done. People, of course, do not tune in to listen to you. People tune in to watch the football. But at the same time, I can truly admit that, at least based on my experience, listening to you, you certainly add a strong element to my footballing experience. You certainly add to the enjoyment that I derive from watching live football, the Premier League, the Champions League, and wherever else you do commentary.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Anubhav. What I would throw at you is one word, which is familiarity. People like familiarity, and I guess with experience and with a number of years in the business, that familiarity, that understanding of someone by the audience, appears over time. And this isn't false modesty on my part. I think it's a reality, and I sometimes feel sorry for young people coming into the business who are not necessarily immediately accepted. In fact, almost nobody is immediately accepted. You accept me in your household because you've had no option for the last few years, and I become almost part of the furniture. And it's a privileged position to become part of the furniture, and not something that you should take for granted, and not something that you should use as some sort of badge of honor, as if it were to do with anything I've particularly done. I've just been there, like your favorite chair in the corner, you know, and so. It's something that takes a while. Again, I don't say to earn, but to sort of accrue that position. And I'm very lucky that I've had a long enough stab at it to sort of to get that money in the bank, if you like, with the audience.
I can tell that it's not false humility on your part. You're being extremely genuine and authentic here. You spoke about familiarity as well, right? And one thing that people associate with you is your way with words. I know you've gone on record as well in lots of interviews speaking about how you've had a fascination with words and language. I'm not sure, at least I didn't come across any interview where you've actually explained where that fascination with words stems from. So I would be really curious to know where that fascination stems from, because I personally have a fascination with words as well, with language. So I would love to know where your fascination originates from.
I haven't really got a starting point, Anubhav. Only to say that when I was at school as a really young boy, I used to get some praise and actually some criticism from teachers growing up, because I wrote my stories as a 7-year-old, or my essays when I was getting up to 12, 13, 14. In a pretty fluffy, flowery style, which sometimes, if it was expressive writing, was a good thing. Sometimes, if it was supposed to be an accurate historical essay, my teachers, of course, saw right through me and understood that I didn't actually know the answer. So I was just writing rubbish about it round the edges. And so it used to get me into trouble. And it sometimes, as I say, won me some praise from my teachers, because I love the words more than the facts. And in a way, that is still the case now. So that whereas a lot of commentators, not wrongly at all, absolutely rightly, are quite often statistically led. I use statistics because how can you not in sport? They're a part of the landscape. I suppose rather than being numbers led, I'm words led. Which isn't to say that those who are numbers led don't use words well, because they do. And I hope that where necessary, I use numbers. But for me, words have always been ahead of numbers.
Understood. Understood. For me, personally speaking, Peter, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the right answer, but when I sometimes reflect on what fascinates me about words, at least when I was growing up, and even now, it might be the case to some extent, I always felt as if in order for you to sound smart, you had to use big words. That, of course, isn't necessarily true because, as you rightly pointed out as well, sometimes what happens is when I'm speaking at times, to an outsider, he or she may feel as if, you know what, he has like solid lingo, he can speak well, he knows what the art of communication is, but a lot of times people can actually see through you, people can see the fluff. And sometimes when you have a strong vocabulary, it comes with the downside of you being too verbose as well oftentimes. And so you aren't as precise in your speech.
Absolutely. And Anubhav, that is a very, very acute observation, if I may say so. That's absolutely right. And I say that because I know I've been guilty of being overly verbose. I really have, and still sometimes I am. And equally, or more than equally, at the start of my career, I was certainly guilty of it. And I was guilty, hands up, I was guilty of showing off. And that is something that has to be beaten out of you, actually. I don't think I could have helped it. It's how I was. I like to show off with words, but you have to appreciate that not everybody else is going to enjoy you doing it. I remember way back as a local radio commentator talking about, I forget what the issue was, doesn't really matter, but I say, and I would also say in parentheses, and at the other end of the press box, I heard an experienced and hard journalist shout at me, brackets. And I thought, and that was a great lesson. Why did I have to say parentheses when brackets would have done?
Right.
And that's just one example of just unnecessary showing off, and that's what it has been. And although I like to think it happens less often now, because the older you get, the less perhaps you feel the need to show off, you can still be guilty of it, and it's worth being checked. And I must say that is one of the best questions on this subject I've ever been asked. It was absolutely spot on.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. One of the phrases that I keep reminding myself of is minimum necessary length. So I want to be able to describe something articulately and using the least number of words that I have to use to describe the topic, as opposed to going overboard when it comes to my use of words and phrases to describe the same thing. So minimum necessary length is something I keep reminding myself. But as you said, oftentimes you do forget, but it's a friendly reminder to help you stay, on course.
Yes, it's a very good reminder in commentary, because the sort of the great moments, the memorable moments, the Aguero goals and so on, those are rare. You have to remember they're rare. So most of the time, that isn't what it is. And as a commentator on a regular game where it's United 1, Rovers 1, City 1, Arsenal 1, whatever, those are the bread and butter. And they don't, the danger is to try and articulate them all as if they were it. They're not. And for the most part, economy is a good thing. As a commentator, the rule, the first rule I was always told is try not to speak unless you can add to the picture. Right. That is the television commentator. That's the big rule that you are given when, as I did, you move from radio to television. Now, if you follow that to its ultimate, actually, you'd never speak at all, because generally speaking, the pictures are self-evident. But which is why a television commentator, myself included, can be an irritant, because you're telling people what they can already see and know. And you sometimes, I do, shout at the television and say, shut up. But if there is a role for a commentator, then it is to try and add to the picture. Right. However, when a goal is scored, I always try somewhere within my sort of outpouring to leave, if possible, at least a 2, 3, 4 second spell for the atmosphere to do the work for me. When the ball hits the net, leave it, and then come in with whatever it is you have to say about the goal. Although, of course, now we're going back to empty stadiums, that technique might have to change a little bit.
Peter, that's a good segue to one of the points that I had in my mind. People, of course, are speaking about the psychological impact on sportsmen, on athletes, on sportswomen. Virat Kohli recently mentioned that it's going to be hard to recreate the same emotions when he's going to be playing behind closed doors. But I think we ought to spare a thought for the commentators as well, because I'm pretty sure the energy from the crowd has a contagious effect on the commentators as well, right? You derive lots from the crowd. So without the crowd element, how exactly do you plan to change your style of commentary in any way?
Well, it's a completely different landscape because you surf the wave of the crowd noise. That is, you know, it is like, I said, this sounds a little pretentious, but it's like being a soloist with an orchestra or with a choir behind you,
Right.
Because your line of the music is the line that is accompanied by that ongoing ambience, the crowd noise. And so it's going to feel very exposed. It's going to it's going to be, I think, quite inhibiting, not least, because this is one thing that commentators perhaps haven't thought about yet. It's not impossible that the players will hear you. And certainly that's not something, so if I'm saying, "Cool, that's a poor ball from Salah," and he's looking up, sorry. I mean, I don't suppose it'll happen quite like that. You're talking about the greatest players in the world.
Right, right.
And maybe they make a mistake because everybody makes mistakes in every game. That'll be quite odd. I don't think it'll be quite like that, but it certainly will feel exposed. And they're just... And the extent of your volume at a great moment is a really interesting one, because if you take it right back to the start of broadcasting, the reason commentators are loud when a goal is scored is because the ground is loud.
Absolutely.
Now, the ground won't be loud. So does that mean when somebody scores a goal that wins the title for Liverpool, I just remain sort of conversational as I am with you? I don't think so, because people would think, oh, he's not very excited about that. But on the other hand, shouting and screaming when actually nobody else is shouting and screaming will feel odd. So I guess we'll just find a way.
And what's the routine going to look like for commentators? What are some of the safety measures that will be incorporated to make sure that everyone's maintaining social distance and other precautionary measures are being inculcated?
Well, normally at a match, I would turn up 2.5, 3 hours beforehand. I'd probably go to the media room. I'd mix with journalist friends and so on, have a cup of tea, talk, share information, that sort of thing. And then I would go pitch side and I would possibly bump into the coaches and ask for little bits of information, all of that sort of thing. I don't think any of that will happen. I don't suppose I or any of my fellow commentators will get anywhere close to the players or the coaching staff at all. I suspect we will go into the ground by some back door. We will go immediately to our broadcast point and stay there until kickoff. And as soon as we're finished, we'll get up and go out again. That is what I imagine. It may be different from that, but certainly any interaction will be, I think, reduced to an absolute minimum.
That's a very interesting point. So pre-COVID, I'm guessing when you got to the stadium, maybe a couple of hours or 3 hours before kickoff was underway, I'm guessing you had quite a few interactions with players as well, walking into the stadium. So what were those interactions like?
With players?
With players?
Yes. I mean, not many, truthfully, because players arrive on their big gleaming bus and go in at their personal entrance and go straight into the dressing room and so on. And if you happen to know a player or two, occasionally you might stop and wave. But to be perfectly honest, they're in game mode. And only occasionally can you really engage with them to any meaningful degree. So no, players not really, more fellow media staff and so on. Club media staff, certainly, who might have information for you and so on. They would be the source of what you needed to know.
And Peter, would love to know a detailed version of what your routine and your preparation looks like in the lead up to a weekend round of fixtures. So say, for instance, you just finished your commentary on a Sunday, right? And you have the next set of matches the following weekend. How do you prepare between this weekend and the following weekend when match is underway?
Yes, well, I mean, this depends hugely on what's happening midweek, of course, because I do also cover the Champions League and the Europa League for domestic British television. So I might have another match on a Tuesday, another match on a Thursday. I always say to people that on average, and this is an average, one match is 1 day's preparation.
Okay.
So take that as an 8-hour chunk, if you like. So broadly speaking, if I have a match on a Saturday and a match on a Sunday, then Thursday and Friday covers that. But that is complicated if I have a match on a Tuesday and a Wednesday as well, and you'll work out very quickly there aren't enough days in the week. But that average breaks down in different ways. If I have to do Liverpool against Manchester United in the middle of the season, the truth of that is that by then I know all the players. Everybody knows all the players. Liverpool against Manchester United might be the biggest game in English football from a global perspective, but it's not the most difficult to broadcast, because there's not too much you can tell the audience it doesn't already know. These are world-famous players and so on. So the basic statistical work has to be done. Thinking around the issues has to be done. Thinking precisely what you might say in the lead up to the game has to be done. But it's not the same really close-up homework that you might have to do if you were doing a Premier League game involving perhaps one of the smaller clubs who you haven't seen so much of recently. That might take a bit longer because you're sort of starting from nearer scratch. Or if you're doing a game in the FA Cup, which involves a tiny, tiny little team you've never seen before, that might involve going to watch them train, meeting people, shaking hands, actually having conversations. And that could be 2 days' work for actually a very low-profile game. Or a European Champions League game where there's a team from Belgium or the Ukraine or whatever that, again, isn't part of your day-to-day life. And that can be 2 days' work. So Liverpool against Manchester United might be down from 8 hours to 4. But if it was suddenly Bournemouth against a teeny-weeny club in the FA Cup, it could be up to 12, 16 hours.
Understood.
So basically, it's a case of planning ahead and knowing in your head where you have to be up to at each stage of the process.
Understood. But I think you have mentioned in the past that you actually love commentating on some of the smaller games as well, because that's the romance of English football that you love so much.
Yes. Well, I love the smaller games. I love the smaller games because, well, for the reasons I gave, really. If you're commentating on a non-league team, someone at the 6th or 7th tier of our pyramid, then you're dealing with amateurs or at best semi-professionals who do another job, come in and train in the evenings, and are much more accessible, obviously, because these aren't famous people who have stories to tell. And there's a charm about it. The butcher or the postman could be playing against a millionaire Premier League star. And these are really, I love those. And I love them not least from a broadcasting perspective, because there is something new to tell the audience. Don't get me wrong, Liverpool against Manchester United is great. But if we go back to what I said earlier about don't speak unless you can add to the picture, or unless you've got something to give the audience, well, Liverpool against Manchester United, honestly, you, as a Premier League fan, you could watch that with the sound down and you would know it all. And so in that sense, it's like a teacher talking to a class that knows it all.
Makes sense.
Whereas if you have a really small team, then there's something you can pass on.
Absolutely. Well said. And talking about your preparation, say, for instance, let's just take Liverpool versus Manchester United as an example. When you're preparing for that game, you mentioned that, of course, you know all the names of the players, right? So not much preparation required on that front. You think of perhaps like a broad storyline to relate to the viewers before the game kicks off, right? What else are you actually preparing? I know you've mentioned that you have to be as instinctive as possible. That's the word you've used. And you've talked about, trust that the right words come out. How much of it do you perhaps think of certain words or phrases that you can use when you anticipate certain things might materialize a certain way?
Well, what I do is make a clear distinction between pre-match and match. So everything that occurs up to the first time the ball is kicked, you can essentially prepare. And I always liken it to a direct free kick or practicing penalties. As a professional footballer, you would be silly not to be as prepared for a set-piece situation as you possibly can be. The ball is going to be sitting still there. There are going to be 5 players in the wall. Where the goalkeeper is going to stand. So you practice time and time again, kicking the ball into the top right-hand corner. As a commentator, I know that 5 minutes before the game kicks off, the players are going to line up in the tunnel. They're going to walk out. There's going to be an ovation. They're going to walk into the middle. They're going to shake hands. And I think it would be unprofessional of me not to have taken the time to be as ready for those inevitabilities as I can be. Now, once the game kicks off, the rules completely change, because any attempt to script an unpredictable football match can only end in tears, because whatever you anticipate, it won't quite happen the way you anticipated it. Now, you might think you can be ready for the goal that wins the league or causes somebody to be relegated or whatever. And to some extent, you can be. You've got to be aware that this event might happen.
Right.
But if you try to write down a sentence articulating what you will say in that moment, then that moment will let you down, because it won't quite happen. Something remarkable could just trip you up. So I'll give you a good example. Last season, when Vincent Kompany belted that one in against Leicester for Manchester City in the last week of the season. Now, admittedly, that wasn't a goal that won the title, but it was a goal that effectively teed up Manchester City winning the title. And if they hadn't scored it, then Liverpool was suddenly going to win it on the last day.
That's
so
right.
It was a really big goal. But if I tried to have words ready for that, for a goal, then I might have anticipated that Aguero would have scored it, or David Silva would have scored it, or something like that. And it would have been a generic, any old Manchester City goal that was important in the title race. It would completely have failed to take on board the fact that A, it was an incredibly good goal, B, it was scored by the captain who was about to retire and playing his last home game, and C, it was 10 minutes from the end, and all of those things. And so you would be a fool to yourself to think that you can tell what you're going to say, because if you do write it down, then you'll miss an element of the reality. And again, the ultimate example of that, of course, is the famous Aguero goal. You might have thought the night before about what you'll say when the goal is scored that wins Manchester City the league that day, but you certainly won't have thought about the fact that they were 2-1 down going into stoppage time and he scored with the last kick of the season. And if you try to use a pre-prepared line, then you would miss the point.
And I'm guessing a similar example, case in point, would be that Manolas goal as well, right? Like, who would have thought that Roma would come back, would make such a staggering comeback? Number one. Number two, who would have thought that the centre back of all the players on the field would actually end up scoring that third goal, right? So you can't predict such events which have like a low probability to happen.
Exactly. I mean, I do get asked about that one, and people say you must have written that, and honestly, they must think I have sort of 48-hour days, because why would you sit in your hotel room the night before writing words about a Greek bloke in Rome? I mean, you wouldn't, would you? If you think about it, even for 20 seconds. Roma, I suppose, might have come back that night. That was improbable, but to believe that anybody would script the Greek centre half scoring the goal that turns the game around, I mean, it's just fanciful. So, but that is a very good example. You're right.
I'm still learning this the hard way, given my very early days in commentary and broadcasting. The other downside of scripting is that sometimes when I feel compelled to stick to a script, then I'm extremely rigid in my ways as well. Whereas spontaneity might actually be my strength, and so I actually do a disservice to myself by not being spontaneous when I'm sticking to a script. And so I'm slowly but surely trying to find a healthy balance as well. So of course, you have to do your preparation. You have to know your content. That's what I keep telling myself. Know your content and have it somewhere in your mind. And then instinctively, you will be able to pluck out the best and most appropriate pieces of content to describe the situation that is being served up to you.
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. In the end, you have to trust yourself. You do. And I would say to you also, Anubhav, that trust hopefully manifests itself in the major moments. And those are the ones you really want to get right. But it is worth repeating that those moments, the ones we've talked about, are extremely rare. Those are extremely rare. And most goals or moments come and go, more or less. I mean, at the time they're noticed because they're goals. They're the high points of any given game. But they're not things that you're going to talk about for the rest of your life. And when people are kind enough to bring up sort of what might be the highlights of my life, they are that's nice, but it's such a tiny percentage,
Right.
and not every goal is a sort of stream of perfect language. Not every
Absolutely.
goal goes by without hesitation and stumble. It's only like being a player in the sense that you go into a game, you trust yourself. There's hardly a game goes by in which I don't make a mistake of some sort. I mean, we're all self-critical, but a mistake in terms of tone, a mistake certainly in terms of player identification, where you say X and it was actually Y. You just pray the night before that you don't say X when it was Y who scored.
Right, right.
That's the thing. Mistakes are not just inevitable; they are, it's a matter of fact that in any given game, I will make at least one mistake, probably 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10. But so will Lionel Messi. He's a brilliant player. And you remember his brilliant moments. But you know what? He has been known to give the ball away. And, you should, I don't think anyone, and I certainly make sure I tell myself, you shouldn't judge yourself on, you shouldn't be overly harsh at the fact that you're human and error is inevitable. So that all plays into the trust argument. You have to trust that most of the time it's going to be okay.